What if I told you that one of the most famous slogans in history, "Just do it," was inspired by the last words of a convicted killer? And that this same story is tied to a landmark legal battle that completely reshaped American law and privacy rights. It's a tale that's stranger than fiction, involving a best-selling book, a blockbuster movie, shocking crime, and a $50 million lawsuit that pitted a Pulitzer Prize winner against a man on death row. This is the story of Gary Gilmore, Norman Mailer, and the lawsuit that forever changed how we think about a person's life story. Our story begins in the summer of 1976, in the small, quiet state of Utah. A man named Gary Gilmore, recently released from prison, went on a violent crime spree. Over 2 horrifying nights, he robbed and murdered 2 innocent men, Max Jensen, a gas station attendant, and Benny Bushnell, a motel manager. Gilmore was quickly caught, and what happened next was unprecedented. He confessed to everything, refused to appeal his conviction, and demanded to be executed by firing squad. He famously said, "Let's do it." This defiant attitude captured the nation's attention. Why would someone demand their own death? Enter Norman Mailer, one of America's most celebrated and controversial authors. Mailer, a Pulitzer Prize winner, saw an incredible story in Gilmore's life and death. He wanted to understand the man behind the headlines, his troubled childhood, his years in prison, his brief, violent freedom, and his strange desire to die. Mailer decided to write a book about it. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed access, intimate details that only someone close to Gilmore could provide. That's where Lawrence Schiller comes in. Schiller was a journalist and producer who had secured exclusive rights to Gilmore's story. He conducted hundreds of hours of interviews with Gilmore himself, his family, his girlfriend Nicole Baker, and everyone else involved. Mailer and Schiller struck a deal. Schiller would provide the raw material, the interviews, the documents, the inside scoop, and Mailer would weave it into a literary masterpiece. The result was The Executioner's Song, a groundbreaking book published in 1979. It was hailed as a new form of journalism, a true-life novel that told the story from multiple perspectives, blurring the lines between fact and fiction. The book was a massive success, winning Mailer his second Pulitzer Prize. It was praised for its unflinching look at American violence and its complex, humanizing portrait of a killer. But not everyone was celebrating. One person felt her life had been stolen and sold for profit: Nicole Baker, Gilmore's girlfriend. Nicole was a central figure in The Executioner's Song. Her turbulent, passionate, and ultimately tragic relationship with Gilmore was the emotional heart of the book. Their story was one of love and despair, including a suicide pact they made while Gilmore was in prison. Mailer's book laid bare the most intimate, private, and painful details of her life. She felt exposed, exploited, and misrepresented. So, Nicole Baker did something bold. She sued Norman Mailer, his publisher, and the film production company for $50 million. Her lawsuit made a groundbreaking claim that her life story was her property and that Mailer had stolen it without her consent and without proper compensation. This was a radical idea at the time. Could a person's life really be considered property, like a house or a car? The case known as Baker v. Mailer became a legal battleground, raising fundamental questions about the First Amendment, the right to privacy, and the very nature of storytelling. The core of Nicole's argument was the right of publicity. This legal concept, which was still relatively new, states that an individual has the right to control the commercial use of their name, image, and likeness. It's why celebrities can sue if their face is used in an ad without their permission. But Nicole's lawyers took it a step further. They argued that her entire life story, her experiences, her emotions, her relationships was part of her likeness, and that Mailer had commercially exploited it for his book and the subsequent movie. On the other side, Mailer's defense was anchored in the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech and the press. His lawyers argued that The Executioner's Song was a work of journalism and historical significance. Gilmore's case was a major public event, and Nicole, through her relationship with him, had become a public figure. As such, her life was a legitimate subject for public interest and commentary. They argued that if writers could be sued for telling true stories about real people, it would have a chilling effect on journalism, history, and literature. Where would the line be drawn? Could a historian be sued by the descendants of a historical figure? Could a biographer be sued by their subject's ex-spouse? The legal world watched with bated breath. The case wasn't just about Nicole Baker and Norman Mailer. It was a clash of two fundamental rights, the right to privacy and the right to free expression. If Nicole won, it could create a precedent where anyone involved in a newsworthy event could demand payment from reporters and authors, effectively giving them veto power over their own stories. This could cripple investigative journalism and the writing of contemporary history. On the other hand, if Mailer won, did that mean that a person's most private moments could be taken and sold to the highest bidder, leaving them with no recourse? The court was faced with a monumental task, balancing the public's right to know with an individual's right to be left alone. The case dragged on, and the legal arguments became more and more complex. It wasn't a simple case of right versus wrong. It was about defining the boundaries of storytelling in the modern age. Ultimately, the court sided with Norman Mailer. The judge ruled that because the executioner's song was a work of public interest and historical value, it was protected by the First Amendment. The court found that Nicole Baker, by her association with the nationally infamous Gary Gilmore, had become an involuntary public figure. As a result, her right to privacy was not absolute and was outweighed by the public's interest in the story. The court stated that a person's life story is not a piece of property that can be owned or copyrighted. You can't put a patent on your own past. Nicole Baker lost her $50 million lawsuit, but the case of Baker v. Mailer left an indelible mark on the legal and literary worlds. It solidified the legal principle that the lives of public figures even involuntary ones are. Fair game for authors and journalists, as long as the work is newsworthy and not a purely commercial exploitation. It helped clarify the murky waters of the right of publicity, establishing that it primarily applies to commercial advertising. It's not to expressive works like books, films, and news reports. The legacy of this case is profound. It ensures that writers like Mailer can tackle complex, controversial subjects without the constant fear of being sued into silence. It protects the ability of the press to report on matters of public concern, even when it involves the private lives of individuals caught up in the news. Imagine if every person interviewed for a documentary or mentioned in a history book could sue for a cut of the profits. The flow of information would grind to a halt. However, the case also serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the ethics of storytelling. While Mailer won in court, the moral questions remain. Was it right to expose Nicole Baker's life in such excruciating detail? Did the public's right to know justify the personal pain it caused her? The lawsuit forced a conversation within the media about the responsibility that comes with telling someone else's story. It pushed journalists and authors to think more deeply about consent, collaboration, and the human cost of their work. So, the next time you read a biography, watch a true crime documentary, or see a movie based on a true story, think about the $50 million lawsuit that helped make it possible. The battle between Nicole Baker and Norman Mailer was more than just a legal dispute. It was a fight over the ownership of truth itself. It affirmed that our histories, our news, and our shared culture belong to everyone. But it also reminded us of the profound human impact of turning real life into public art. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what you think. Did the court make the right decision? See you next time.